Hi, I'm Isabella McElrath, and this is our research project, along with Jordan Levine and Jordan Vaughn, called Help, I've Fallen and I Can't Get Up. And it's a look at the bystander effect amongst teenagers. This is our literature review. So our hallmark study is based off of the Kitty Genevieve's case, and that was conducted by Darlene Latine. And Kitty Genovese was brutally raped and murdered in the middle of the street around her apartment building. There were 35 witnesses, and all of them failed to intervene or help her, so ultimately she died because of this, and this became known as the bystander effect. And that term was coined by Darlene Latine, and they hypothesized that groups show less helping behavior than individuals due to diffusion of responsibility. And so they tested this in their experiment called Lady in Distress, where they had 2 separate rooms, and a subject was put in one room along with a friend or a stranger, or they were alone. And in the other room there was a 130-second video of a believable woman like screaming out of pain. And so they measured how long or if the subject decided to help the victim, and the results were 64% of subjects tried to help, and of that 64%, only 61% were alone. So this supported their hypothesis that individuals helped more. So you can see this is a modern take on the bystander effect. People are just recording with their phones, someone's drowning, and yeah. Okay. So the next study, 4 psychologists tested priming participants with an unrelated social context in a 2-page questionnaire. So for the first page of the questionnaire, they asked them to imagine winning a dinner for themselves and 30 friends, or themselves and 20 friends, or themselves and 1 friend. And so the next page was unrelated, and they asked the subjects to choose a percentage of their salary that they would be willing to donate to their college that they graduated from, and that ranged from 1 to over 25% of their salary. And it showed that subjects tended to pledge less in a group of 30 because they felt less responsible to make a bigger offer than when they were just with 1 friend. The next study, Levine and Croth, hypothesized that it would be easier to help in a group of friends rather than in a group of strangers. So they looked at group relationships and distinguished between in-group and out-group. So for their study, they took a group of women and they asked them to imagine a violent act on the street, and they were either in a group of their friends or a group of strangers or alone. And the results showed that when they were in a group of friends, they wouldn't follow the bystander effect because they formed a solidarity in the group and put their stuff together and helped out the victim. So increased helping behavior. Next. The next study, they found an increase in helping behavior of in-group to out-group in order to make their in-group look better. So it was more about reputation and actually helping the victim. So their helping behavior increased for more selfish reasons, I guess, and so they could make an impression on the out-group and uphold a reputation. But when it was between in-group and in-group, helping behavior didn't increase. Like, they followed the bystander effect because they had nothing to prove to their in-group. So in this study, Rutkowski, Gruder, and Romer studied how the cohesiveness of a group affects the bystander effect, and they hypothesized that low cohesive groups follow the bystander effect, whereas high cohesive groups in like a bigger group, the bystander effect would reverse. So they tested this in male undergrad students and put them in groups, and they like decided if they were low or high based on activities they did, their cohesiveness, in groups of 2 to 4, and they responded to loud crash and noises of pain. And they found that the high cohesive groups tended to help, especially in groups of 4. Efron and Knowles found that the status of a group, focusing on like whether it's coherent and unified or not, correlates to the social acceptance of group biases against outgroups. So the distinctiveness of the group, the entitativity of the group, allows for that in-group to be more, to like discriminate in a more socially accepted way to the out-group. For this study, femininity and masculinity were tested for their effect on helping behavior. So the psychologists hypothesized that on the gender spectrum, if you fell more towards the masculine side, helping behavior would decrease because you want to like keep your cool, like portray yourself as more masculine. But on the feminine side, helping behavior would also decrease because you'd be too scared to help. And then if you fell in the middle, then your helping behavior would increase. So for their study, they found that the masculine tendencies were true, but the feminine were not. So they found that masculinity does, in fact, inhibit helping behavior. So this experiment focused on the help givers rather than the victim, and they focused on the amount of help givers necessary in dire situations. So if only one help giver was really necessary, then the bystander effect is followed. But if a situation requires many help givers, then the bystander effect isn't followed because more people are willing to help because they see that it's like a dire situation that needs a lot of help. So the effect is reversed. Okay, so after researching all this, we came up with 2 questions, and that was like, what about age? Does age affect the bystander effect? Like, do teenagers follow the bystander effect? And we decided to investigate this in our own experiment.
So, our methodology for the experiment. Since we were testing, since we wanted to see how age affected the experiment, our population would be high school aged people. And since we are at McDonough School, our sample was McDonough School students, grades 9 through 12, and more specifically, it was anyone who was walking to or from lunch. So our variables for our experiment, the independent variable was the age of the victim. Since we wanted to test whether age affected the bystander effect, we wanted to keep the age constant, so we had 2 victims. One was a first grade student, it was a girl, and then our next was an 8th grader who could pass as a high schooler, and that was just to minimize the risk of people recognizing who the victim was since we are in a pretty small school. And our dependent variable, what we were testing for, was the extent of the helping behavior. So before we could begin anything, we really had to operationalize the definition of helping behavior, and so we spent a lot of time on this. We ended up coming up with that low helping behavior was that participants would continue walking without looking at the victim, or they would do a quick glance at the victim but continue on their way. Medium helping behavior was that the participant would pick up 1 or 2 objects, but again, no real acknowledgement of the victim and then continuing on their way. But then high helping behavior was that the participant would help the victim, would ask them if they were okay, stay after everything was picked up, ask them if they were okay again, and then continue on their way. So here we have a video of what these look like, just so you guys can see what we were searching for. So as you can see, there was a clear cut way between each of them, and so those were just the general behaviors we were looking for in each of them. So, sorry.
So I don't know how to get out.
Oh.
I can't like, I can't. Oh, okay.
Okay, so for the experiment, we
Whatever.
needed a number of materials, and so for the victim, we needed notebooks, folders, a cup, a water bottle, an open pencil case so that the contents would fly out. We wanted the middle schooler to have a jacket to hide their uniform. Since the middle school uniform is slightly different from high school, we just wanted to, again, obscure anything that would cause people to know that they were a middle schooler. We also had a consent form for both the 1st and the 8th grader to fill out, and then a script for them to follow, which will be shown on the next slide. And then the way we picked our victims was we had 2 first graders who were picked by the teachers. We asked for girls who were outgoing and willing to approach anybody, and for the most part, that's what we got. And then for the middle schoolers, we chose them by going to their lunchroom and kind of scanning to see who looked like they could pass as a high schooler. And then the girl that we chose wanted to have a friend there, and the friend just so happened to fit the criteria as well. So the script that they followed, this is exactly what we had them say. So they would walk towards the participant, and when they got near them, they would just drop everything, as you guys saw in the video. Then they would exclaim something like, "Oh no," or "Why am I such a klutz?" and then proceed to follow the next actions. And if the participant didn't say anything, they would say, "Oh no, they're going to be so mad at me," and then continue on like that. And then if the participant did help, they would just say thank you, because we didn't want words to get too much in the way of what people's initial reaction would be. So our procedure for this, we were following a naturalistic observation type of experiment, and so we would have for the first grader, they would be at a little hiding spot, and when we saw participants, we would have them walk towards them and then drop the objects when they got there. And then we would be observing from our hiding spot so that nobody could really see us. And then for the 8th graders, we made it so that I was facing the back to where people would be walking and they could see, and then we would have them say like, "Oh, see you guys later," as if we were just having a nice lunch or something, and then continue to follow the script as normal. And so we ran 10 trials of individuals and 10 trials of group for each age group, and so we ended up with 40 trials total. So our hypothesis was that we predict that the bystander effect will stay true, and that an individual person might be more inclined to help the victim rather than a group of people. However, we also believe that people will help children rather than people their own age, mainly because of empathy and overall concern for a younger child.
Alright, so here we have results. So from our results, we were able to conclude that bystanders in groups actually helped more than individuals, and so this ended up being a reversal of the bystander effect. And then we also saw that both individuals and group bystanders actually helped the high schooler more than the lower schooler, and so this, we believe, is because of the influence of in-group and out-group behavior. And so although everyone is in this, like the McDonough community in-group, there's still an in-group for age, and so since the high school victim and the high schooler bystanders were in the same in-group, we believe that that had more of an influence over the in-group of school. And then, so we'll show more results on the next couple slides, but from this, we were able to conclude that our hypothesis was in fact false. And so more results. So we saw that age had much more of an influence on the individual bystanders than the group bystanders. And so we saw that 40% of individuals gave high helping behavior to the high schoolers, while 40% of individuals gave low helping behavior to the lower schoolers. And although those percentages sound the same because they're both 40%, the results were vastly different, because we saw that, you'll see in the next slide on the graph, but we saw that out of 10 trials or 10 individuals, we saw that 5 individuals gave high helping behavior to the high schooler, and only one gave high helping behavior to the lower schooler. And then on the flip side, we saw that three individuals gave low helping behavior to the high schooler, while 7 gave low helping behavior to the lower schooler. So those results are definitely vastly different from one another. But we also wanted to make the point that we only did 10 trials, and so a lot of our results aren't that much different. It's not like we had 20 people who gave high helping behavior and 1 person who gave low. They're not that vastly different. But we also saw that overall, McDonough students are definitely more likely to help because we believe it's because of the private school environment, and so there's more of a cultural pressure to do the right thing. And so this kind of explains why groups helped more than individuals, we believe, because people in groups, they feel not only the pressure of the environment, but also the pressures of others around them, and so that's why we believe that groups helped more. Okay, so here's a graph of group bystanders. It's kind of cut off, but whatever. And so on the dark blue is the lower school victim, and on the light blue is like the middle school posing as a high schooler victim, and then on the x-axis you have the helping behavior. You have the different types of helping behaviors, and then on the y-axis you have the number of trials out of 10 for each helping behavior. So like you see 5, that means 5 out of 10 trials this helping behavior occurred. And so a couple of things that we wanted to point out. We wanted to say that 80% of students in groups gave medium to high helping behavior to the high schooler, but only 50% did the same for the lower schooler, and then which means that 50% of groups didn't help the lower schooler, but only 20% of groups didn't help the high schooler. So this shows that groups or bystander groups definitely favored helping the high schooler more than the lower schooler. And so then we also saw something similar with the individual bystanders as well. And so we saw that 70% of them gave some sort of helping behavior to the high schoolers, and only 30% give some sort of helping behavior to the lower schoolers, which means that 30% didn't help the high schoolers, while 70% did help the lower schoolers, which that fact was the most interesting to us because if you think about it, more than half of the individual bystanders just blatantly did not help the lower schooler, which was really interesting. And so here's just a chart of the results, so it has everything, so you can see the trials, the types of helping behavior, and then the lower schooler and middle schooler.
Okay, so we had a good number of confounds for this experiment. The first one was the potential recognition of Confederates and experimenters. One of the lower school students was the daughter of the head of the upper school, so a good amount of people know who she is. And the 8th grade participant, she said she had some upper school friends, so some people could have recognized her. There could have been an overlap of subjects because we did do the experiment about the same time of day each day, so it could have been the subject's normal routine to be walking in that particular location, and we could have dropped the things in front of them multiple times. And we also used different locations around the school. We went inside buildings or outside, so people could be more likely to help outside than inside, or inside than outside. Also, as we mentioned before, it's a private school environment, so people are more likely to help. We have an honor code here, so there are pressures to do the right thing, as we stated earlier. We also, the number of items and what items we dropped were different, which could have an effect. One time we had a stack of flashcards and they flew everywhere, so people are more likely to help that because they look more helpless. And also the weather conditions, especially when we did it outside, when it was windy, people could be less likely to help because, I don't know, they want to get out of the wind and the cold, or they're more likely to help because they feel bad for someone that dropped their stuff in like bad weather. And also the distance the Confederate dropped their stuff from the from the subject, it differed, especially for the younger girls. If they got scared of boys or whatever, they would drop their things kind of far away, which would be, so a person felt less, they were like less likely to help because it was like out of their way. So, yeah.
So some things that we wanted to think about afterwards, as Jordan and Isabella both stated, it could be an image thing at McDonough. We do have that honor code that was mentioned, and a big part of it is respect. And so one might be more inclined to help when they're in a group and people are kind of watching them, and it's a social pressure to help, as compared to when you're alone and nobody's really there to tell you what to do. And also, there was one thing that I noticed during the middle school trials with medium helping behavior within the groups, is that if it was a group of 5 or so and 2 stayed back to help, they would often call out to their friends like, hey guys, you're not going to help. And so that was a big indicator of the honor code thing. Another thing that we wish we could have done was more trials. We only had 40 trials, and while that seems like a lot in the grand scheme of things, it's really not. We wish we could go to more locations, but it was just a time constraint. And it would be interesting to take it to other private schools to see how they compared, take it to public schools because that environment is different, and maybe just another public location that has mostly teenagers, just to kind of see what people do in different locations, like at a mall or something. Yeah.
All right, so further research. So we thought like one route you could take would be to look at elderly people and see if old age has a similar effect that young age or like adulthood has on the bystander effect. And we were actually, that was going to be part of our study, but the amount of time that we had to conduct it didn't allow us to do that. But we think that that would be an interesting thing to do. And then also, you could look at the actual age, or the actual gender of the victim. So a lot of the lit review studies we looked at the gender of the bystanders instead of the victim. And so if you add age to a study, if you're going to look at the study, the gender of the victim, then that might be interesting. So for example, you could look at the difference between like a little boy versus an older girl and see who, like the types of helping behavior that you'd get from that. So yeah, thank you guys so much for coming and we're happy.
Bystander effect.